My name is Rennie Grant. I am a recovering person, a musician, and I'm also a drug and alcohol counselor at Colmac. And they call me Roc because I play guitar.
All right, ready. Hi, I'm Tony Massey. I'm a psychiatrist, addiction medicine specialist, also at Colmac. And I'm the doc part of our Roc Doc.
You're the brains, and I'm just the dumb guy who plays guitar.
Oh man, I think it's, so sometimes it's reverse, but you still play guitar.
True, I'll accept that. So we just finished interviewing Peter Brune, who's he's the founder of the New Day campaign, and we were talking about hopelessness and sort of the whole concept of shaming people with addiction, or people with addiction shaming themselves, and acceptance and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
I thought we'd take it a little bit further. And we were sort of thinking it's not maybe so much society or friends saying, oh God, it's awful that you are going to AA now and stop drinking.
So
you're
like
a terrible
society
person.
being totally unsupportive, like, oh God, look at this addict.
Yeah, but it's the internal, that kind of that self-talk, the brain chatter, I think is what a lot of people are, who are in particularly early recovery have to deal with.
Yeah, sort of like judging their internal versus the 1940s version of the alcoholic who's like the Skid Row guy, and like I think that people do that. They sort of like, I'm not that guy. And if you use the word alcoholism, people look at that guy in their minds and they think, oh no, I'm not that. But and failing to realize that George Bush outed himself as a recovering alcoholic, president of America.
Right.
So it's not just it's such a broad spectrum.
Right.
What's your experience with that? I mean, how do you find people get past that self-judgment, that self-hate or shame?
Well, sometimes it's part of a psychiatric illness. Someone may have depression, anxiety, something like that.
Right.
That has to, and you just need to get that managed. But if that's not the issue, if that's being dealt with, then I think there's a whole process of this restoration of hope that really involves being part of a community.
Right. Rat Park.
Yeah, I think you really need to. I mean, we're a social species.
We are, absolutely.
And I think that part of healing involves being in a community that's where you can look around and say that he was like me. But look where he is now.
Right. So I think this is one of the beautiful things about 12-step programs is that you can go to a room and there's a guy, he's got 1 day clean, and he's shaking and shivering and sweating, and next to him is a guy who's got 35 years clean, who's got his arm around saying, I was you. And the guy shivering is probably going like, there's no possible way. Yeah. But enough times, you go to enough meetings, and you realize the truth is that person was shaking and shivering, and now he's, big professional job or whatever.
And he's putting his arm around someone else's.
Right, it's that act. But let me ask you a question, and I've always wondered this. So, is it fair to say that we really have no idea why community and fellowship is so healing? Or is there actually like a basis for this, or is it just how we're made?
Well, I think it is how we're made, and that's the basis for it. We're actually looking at some interesting neurotransmitter systems. Maybe involving oxytocin and oxytocin receptor density.
What does oxytocin do for us? Is that like a dopamine kind of happy chemical, or?
Well, it's probably best, or until more recently, is best known or associated with childbirth.
So the pain.
Well, in terms of contractions and actual childbirth.
Okay,
but,
so nothing to do with.
But it's like why do we?
But
why do we need to have that? So but it looks like that has an impact on our socializing and maybe even kind of regulating to some way how we go about that.
Like a bonding.
Like a bonding.
I often say early recovery is the same as childbirth. It feels, I'm just kidding, I don't know what childbirth feels like, but I can imagine emotionally, for me at least, it was incredibly painful.
I had a hangnail once. It's similar to childbirth, is what I was thinking, at the time.
We are going to get some serious hangnail. Carol Winnett said, if you want to know what it feels like to give birth to a child, She said, grab your upper lip and then pull it back over your head.
That's all.
That's how you find out what it feels like. But I mean, I think that's true, you know. And I said Rat Park as a joke, but that's something we often reference in the show. It's an experiment that was done in the '60s that took a rat, gave him drugs, and then there was a whole community of rats. And the lone rat took enough drugs, killed himself. The community of rats rarely did the drugs at all. And I think that was sort of an illustration of the 12-step groups, and actually also recovery groups like IOPs, like Colmac, where there's a real community feeling.
And you certainly see that in treatment as people, you know, get engaged in
that's a good
group
word.
and you know, start to participate, and then get to the point where they are actually starting to help others. You know, that you know, that's when I become really optimistic. Like this person's on a good track.
From an observational viewpoint.
From an observational viewpoint. You know.
Subjectively, you can't just sit there in the room. That's not the medicine. Showing up for IOP is half the battle, but just sitting in the room's not the medicine. He used the magic word, which is, you know, we have to engage. I have to start talking. I have to start talking about my insides, the true insides. You know, not just the whole, like a lot of people are, it's difficult to be so vulnerable, but the reality is, if I really want to say, this is horrible, I don't want to be here, this sucks, that's what you should say. Because that's the truth.
And then what happens to the load of shame internally when you do that?
It goes down. I'm sharing it. I'm no longer concealing it.
And you share it with people who aren't, you know,
They're not
vomiting.
judgmental.
Yeah, or whatever. You know, there's not like a bad reaction.
They're all going like, yeah, I can totally relate.
Yeah.
Which is probably the opposite expectation of the person who's afraid to share because they're afraid that people are going to judge them and point fingers. And, you know, they're going to say something that's not totally recovery, and they're going to feel like everyone thinks they're a loser or something.
Yeah.
But, all right, well, I think we've sussed out a couple of things at least.
Sussed out a couple of things, yeah. And this is a really great event.
Absolutely.
New Day campaign.
Yeah, newdaycampaign.org. There's some events coming up, at least one of which I will be in. I'm not sure which one. Or not in, but there. I want to go and support this. I think it's a really beautiful idea.
All right. Well, great. So we did it again.
We did. We've done it again. Whatever it is, I'm not sure.
Okay. Tony Massey, Doc.
And Rennie Grant. I am Roc.
All right.
See ya.
Take care.